First Contact's Price. The Galactic Assembly Hall fell silent as the Tellurian ambassador staggered to the central podium. Ambassador Ziri's normally vibrant blue scales had dulled to an ashen gray, and the ceremonial robes draped across their slender shoulders were torn and stained with what appeared to be dried blood. The delegates from 34 spacefaring civilizations watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as the diplomat struggled to remain upright. Esteemed members of the Assembly, Ziri began, voice cracking with exhaustion, I come before you today not as a representative of Telluria's great scientific legacy, but as the voice of a dying world. The holographic displays surrounding the podium flickered to life, projecting images that drew collective gasps from the gathered representatives. The lush, aquamarine landscapes of Telluria, once celebrated as one of the most beautiful garden worlds in the Orion Spur, were now scarred with massive impact craters. Orbital views showed the smoking ruins of once magnificent floating cities, their elegant spires now crumbling into the planet's turquoise oceans. 3 standard cycles ago, vessels of unknown origin entered our system. Ziri continued, manipulating the display to show grainy footage of angular obsidian ships. They responded to no communication attempts. They made no demands. They simply began harvesting. The footage shifted to show bipedal creatures in glossy black exoskeletons, methodically moving through Tellurian settlements, capturing civilians and loading them into transport vessels. Where resistance was met, the invaders responded with overwhelming force, reducing entire districts to ash. We call them the Voidborn. Their technology exceeds our own by centuries. Our defense fleets were obliterated within hours. Over 60% of our population has been taken or killed. Ziri's voice broke. We come before this assembly to beg for aid. Without immediate military intervention, Telluria will fall within 20 standard days. High Counselor Vex of the Artaxian Dominion, the current head of the assembly, raised a bony appendage. Ambassador Ziri, your situation is indeed dire, and you have our deepest sympathies. However, as you know, the Assembly Charter strictly prohibits military intervention in conflicts involving non-member civilizations. The Voidborn are not a civilization, Ziri hissed, momentarily losing their diplomatic composure. They are harvesters, locusts, and they will not stop with Telluria. Each world they consume only adds to their armada. It is only a matter of time before they reach assembly space. That is speculation, Ambassador, replied Counselor Vex. Our analysis suggests the Voidborn are targeting specific biospheres compatible with their consumption needs. Most assembly worlds would be of little interest to them. Ziri's multifaceted eyes widened in disbelief. You would sacrifice Telluria because you believe yourselves safe? We will of course accept Tellurian refugees within the quotas established by our relocation protocols, offered Vex, ignoring the question. And we can dispatch humanitarian vessels to assist with evacuation efforts. Evacuation? Ziri spat. The word. My people evolved in the shallow seas of Telluria. Our biology is uniquely adapted to its gravity and atmospheric composition. Relocation would mean a slow death rather than a quick one. A murmur rippled through the assembly hall as representatives conferred with their delegations. Ziri surveyed the chamber, noting the expressions of practiced sympathy that failed to mask the underlying relief that it was Telluria facing extinction rather than their own worlds. The motion for military intervention is denied, announced Vex after a brief deliberation. Humanitarian aid packages will be prepared within standard protocols, and refugee quotas will be temporarily expanded by 15%. Ziri's shoulders slumped in defeat. Then you have condemned my people to extinction. As the delegates began filing out, a tall figure lingering at the back of the chamber caught Ziri's attention. Unlike the other representatives with their ornate robes and ceremonial adornments, this individual wore a simple, dark uniform with minimal insignia, a small patch bearing an unfamiliar symbol, a blue and green sphere partially wrapped in a stylized silver wing. The figure gestured subtly toward a service corridor. Desperate for any alternative, Ziri followed. Ambassador Ziri, the figure spoke once they were alone, voice surprisingly melodious for such a robust frame. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen, observer from Earth." Ziri examined the human with cautious interest. Earth was not a member of the Assembly. In fact, the humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last decade, and were still considered a primitive, emerging species by galactic standards. Their homeworld's high gravity, extreme climatic variations, and unusually high radiation levels had earned humans the classification of Deathworlders, creatures whose evolutionary path had been forged in conditions most species would find lethal. "Commander Chen, I appreciate your concern, but if the Assembly will not help us, I fail to see how an observer from a non-member world could." Chen's lips curved into what Ziri recognized as a human smile, though it held little warmth. "The Assembly won't help because the Tellurian crisis doesn't threaten their interests, but Earth's situation is different. The Voidborn's harvesting patterns suggest they're working their way systematically through worlds with certain biochemical profiles that Earth shares with Telluria." "Then you understand the threat," Ziri said, a flicker of hope rekindling. "We do. And unlike the Assembly, we're not bound by non-intervention principles when our security is at stake." Chen produced a small data crystal. "This contains coordinates for a rendezvous point in neutral space, outside Assembly monitoring. A vessel will meet you there in 16 hours. "A vessel?" Ziri accepted the crystal with trembling fingers. "What kind of vessel?" Chen's expression hardened. "The kind the Assembly forbids us from building." Captain Maya Reese stood on the bridge of the UES Thunderchild, scrolling through the mission, briefing with a deepening frown. At 42, Reese had spent nearly half her life in Earth's space forces, rising through the ranks during humanity's tentative expansion into the galactic community. The Thunderchild was officially classified as a long-range exploratory vessel in diplomatic communications with the Assembly, but both Reese and the Assembly knew that was a convenient fiction. The Thunderchild was a warship, the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. "Captain, approaching the designated coordinates," announced Lieutenant Park from the navigation station. "Tellurian diplomatic vessel detected on passive sensors. They're alone." Reese nodded. "Maintain stealth protocols until identity is confirmed. Commander Alvarez, status of combat systems?" "All systems nominal, Captain," replied Alvarez, her tactical officer. "Kinetic barriers at full capacity, rail batteries charged, and missile tubes loaded. Hydra point defense grid online but dormant. Let's hope we don't need them," Reese murmured. "This is supposed to be a rescue mission, not a combat deployment." Admiral Kaminsky's orders had been unusually vague. Rendezvous with a Tellurian diplomatic vessel, assess the situation regarding entities identified as Voidborn, and take appropriate action to neutralize any threat to Earth interests. The lack of specific parameters suggested this mission existed in a gray area of plausible deniability. If things went poorly, the Earth government could disavow any official sanction. "Tellurian vessel is hailing us, Captain," reported Communications Officer Chen, on screen. The main display flickered to show a Tellurian with dulled blue scales and weary compound eyes. "This is Ambassador Ziri of Telluria. I was told to expect you, though I admit I anticipated more than a single vessel." "Ambassador Ziri, I'm Captain Maya Reese of the UES Thunderchild. We received your distress information and have been dispatched to assess the situation. Before we proceed further, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Over the next hour, Ziri shared detailed intelligence on the Voidborn invasion. Tactical data, harvesting patterns, observed capabilities, and the devastating impact on Tellurian defenses. The picture that emerged was grim. A methodical, relentless force systematically stripping a planet of its resources, both material and biological. "And the Assembly refused to intervene?" Reese asked, though she already knew the answer. "They offered refugee quotas and sympathy," Ziri replied bitterly. "Telluria has never developed significant military capacity. Our culture values scientific advancement and artistic expression. We trusted in diplomatic solutions and mutual defense agreements that have proven worthless." Reese studied the tactical displays showing the Voidborn fleet positions around Telluria. 17 capital ships and numerous smaller vessels arranged in a harvesting pattern that left no settlement untouched. Against such a force, the Thunderchild, despite its advanced technology, would be severely outmatched in a direct confrontation. Ambassador, I need to confer with my officers. Please stand by. Once the transmission was paused, Reese turned to her senior staff. Thoughts? It's a suicide mission, stated Commander Alvarez bluntly. Even with our stealth systems and advanced armaments, we can't take on a fleet that size. Agreed, nodded Science Officer Dr. Imani. But the ambassador is correct about one thing. The biochemical harvesting pattern suggests Earth would be an ideal target once they're finished with Telluria. The Voidborn appear to be seeking specific compounds found in our shared class of biospheres. So we're looking at a them now us later scenario, Reese summarized. Pretty much, confirmed Imani, and given how quickly they overwhelmed Tellurian defenses, they'd likely do the same to Earth if they caught us unprepared. Reese drummed her fingers on the tactical console, weighing options. Standard protocol would be to return to Earth with this intelligence, recommend a full military mobilization, and prepare defensive positions throughout the Sol system, but that would mean abandoning Telluria to its fate and losing a valuable opportunity to observe the Voidborn in action against someone else. What about a limited engagement? Suggested Lieutenant Commander Okafor, the engineering officer. We could use our stealth capabilities to observe their tactics, perhaps even conduct surgical strikes against vulnerable targets to test their capabilities, and potentially draw their attention directly to humanity, countered Alvarez. We'd be announcing our existence to a predatory force. They're going to find us eventually, Reese said quietly. The question is whether we meet them on our terms or theirs. She reactivated the communication link to the Tellurian vessel. Ambassador Ziri, I've reached a decision. The Thunderchild will accompany you to Tellurian space, but I want to be clear about our capabilities. We're an advanced vessel, but we're still just one ship against many. We cannot promise victory. Relief flooded Ziri's alien features. Captain Reese, even one ship is more than the Assembly offered us. At this point, Telluria has nothing to lose. Reese's expression remained grim. Let's hope Earth doesn't have everything to lose. Set course for Telluria. As the Thunderchild's FTL drive engaged, Reese couldn't shake the feeling that she was committing her ship and crew to a battle they couldn't possibly win. But sometimes, she reflected, the right choice wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to stand by while others fell. The Voidborn had never encountered humans before. Perhaps it was time they learned what it meant to threaten a species that evolved on a Deathworld. Deathworld diplomacy, the Thunderchild dropped out of FTL on the outer edge of the Tellurian system, sensors immediately cataloging the devastation. What had once been a thriving garden world was now surrounded by debris fields, the remnants of orbital habitats and defense platforms, while the planet's surface was marred by expanding black patches visible even from space. Stealth systems. Holding, reported Lieutenant Diaz from the operations console. No indication the Voidborn have detected our arrival. Captain Reese studied the tactical display with narrowed eyes. Dr. Imani, analysis of those surface patterns? The science officer adjusted her instruments, frowning deeply. They appear to be some form of engineered microorganism, Captain. It's systematically breaking down Tellurian biomatter and converting it into compounds compatible with Voidborn physiology. Essentially, they're terraforming the planet to suit themselves while harvesting its resources. Estimated time until the process is complete? Reese asked. At current progression rates, approximately 12 Earth days until irreversible ecological collapse. Ambassador Ziri, who had transferred to the Thunderchild before the jump, made a soft keening sound from the rear of the bridge. My people, my world. Reese didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, she focused on the tactical problem. Commander Alvarez, what's the Voidborn fleet disposition? 17 capital ships in standard harvesting formation, Alvarez replied, manipulating the holographic display. They've positioned themselves to maximize collection efficiency rather than defense. Their smaller vessels, approximately 40 harvester craft, are making regular surface-to-orbit runs, transferring collected materials to the capital ships. Any sign they're aware of our presence? Negative, Captain. They appear focused entirely on their harvesting operations. Reese contemplated the display. Direct engagement was clearly suicidal. Even with the Thunderchild's advanced technology, they couldn't hope to defeat 17 capital ships in open combat. But the Voidborn's single-minded focus on harvesting suggested an opportunity. They're not expecting resistance, she murmured almost to herself. They've grown accustomed to harvesting undefended worlds. Captain? Alvarez looked up questioningly. They destroyed the Turrian defense fleet easily, yes? Reese turned to Ziri. But that was a conventional engagement, a direct confrontation. Between fleets. Yes, confirmed Ziri. Our ships were outdated by assembly standards equipped primarily for scientific exploration rather than warfare. The battle lasted less than 1 standard hour. Reese nodded thoughtfully. So the Voidborn haven't faced adversaries who fight asymmetrically. They haven't encountered Deathworlders. A predatory smile spread across her face as she addressed her crew. We're going to give them a taste of Earth warfare. Not a fair fight. A dirty, unexpected, brutal reminder that some prey bites back. The plan came together quickly. The Thunderchild would remain in stealth, using its advanced sensor suite to identify critical vulnerabilities in the Voidborn harvesting operation. Meanwhile, they would deploy their complement of stealth drones to gather more detailed intelligence on Voidborn technology and tactics. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Okafor called from engineering. I've been analyzing the broadcast frequencies used by the Voidborn fleet. They appear to communicate using quantum-entangled particles for instantaneous transmission, but there's a regular synchronization pulse transmitted conventionally to maintain entanglement stability. Could we disrupt it? Reese asked, immediately seeing the possibility. Better, Okafor grinned. I believe we could replace it with our own signal. For a brief window, perhaps 30 to 40 seconds, we could inject false commands into their communication network before they detect the intrusion. 30 seconds, Reese mused. That's not much time, but it might be enough if used precisely. She turned to Alvarez. What's the most vulnerable point in their harvesting cycle? The transfer window, Alvarez replied without hesitation. When the harvesters dock with the capital ships to offload collected materials. The docking mechanisms require shields to be locally lowered. If we could trigger an emergency jettison protocol during that window, the capital ships would forcibly eject the harvesters, potentially damaging both vessels in the process, Reese completed the thought. How many harvesters are typically docked at any given time? Based on their current rotation, approximately 15 to 20. So we could potentially disable a third of their harvester fleet and cause significant confusion with a single strike. Reese nodded approvingly. That's a start. What else? For the next 6 hours, the crew of the Thunderchild meticulously analyzed every aspect of the Voidborn operation, identifying vulnerabilities and developing exploitation strategies. They discovered that the Voidborn ships relied heavily on automated systems with minimal crew. Biological resources were too valuable to waste on mundane ship operations. This centralization created single points of failure that could be targeted. As the final preparations were made, Ambassador Ziri approached Captain Reese. Your strategy, it is unlike anything I have witnessed in centuries of interstellar diplomacy. The Assembly would consider such tactics dishonorable. Where I come from, Ambassador, there's no honor in extinction, Reese replied bluntly. Humanity evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, extreme climate variations. We survived because we learned to fight dirty when necessary. The Assembly might value their protocols and genteel warfare, but Deathworlders like us, we value survival. And that is why I sought your help rather than the Assembly's, Ziri admitted. My civilization may be older, may have achieved space travel while your ancestors were still perfecting agriculture, but perhaps we have forgotten something essential that you still remember. Reese's expression softened slightly. If we survive this, Ambassador, perhaps our peoples can teach each other. But first, we have to make these Voidborn regret ever setting foot on your world. The moment arrived 20 hours later. The Thunderchild, still undetected in stealth mode, had positioned itself within optimal range of the largest Voidborn capital ship, designated Alpha by the tactical team. 5 harvester vessels were currently docked with Alpha, transferring their grisly cargo. Quantum communication intercept ready, reported Okafor from engineering. Replacement synchronization pulse prepared. Tactical solutions locked for all secondary targets, added Alvarez. Missile tubes 1 through 8 loaded with EMP warheads, rail cannons charged. Reese took a deep breath. Once they executed this attack, there would be no turning back. The Voidborn would be aware of human intervention, and Earth might have inadvertently declared war on a technologically superior adversary. Execute Operation Thunderstrike, she ordered. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. The false synchronization pulse was transmitted, temporarily giving the Thunderchild control of the Voidborn communication network. Emergency jettison commands were immediately sent to all docked harvesters throughout the fleet. The effect was instantaneous and chaotic. Harvester vessels were violently ejected from their docking bays, some spinning out of control, others colliding with nearby craft. Alert signals flashed across the Voidborn fleet as automated systems registered the unexpected failures. Communications. Infiltration successful, Okafor reported. We have 25 seconds remaining before they isolate the intrusion. Execute Phase 2, Reese commanded. The Thunderchild's stealth systems temporarily disengaged as the ship unleashed its first volley, not at the Voidborn vessels themselves, but at precisely calculated points in space around them. 8 EMP missiles detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence, creating overlapping electromagnetic pulses that washed over the disoriented fleet. Multiple vessels experiencing system failures, announced Alvarez, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. 17 harvesters completely disabled, 3 capital ships showing significant power fluctuations. Re-engage stealth and execute repositioning maneuver Delta, Reese ordered. Prepare second strike package. The Thunderchild vanished from conventional sensors, seeming to disappear completely as it rapidly changed position. By the time the Voidborn recovered enough to launch a counterattack, their target was nowhere to be found. They're firing blind, noted Lieutenant Park from navigation, deploying seeker drones in standard search patterns. Their coordination appears significantly degraded. Over the next 14 hours, the Thunderchild conducted a series of hit-and-run attacks against the Voidborn fleet. Each strike targeted specific vulnerabilities identified during their surveillance: propulsion systems, sensor arrays, harvesting mechanisms. Rather than attempting to destroy the vastly superior force, Reese focused on disrupting their cohesion and degrading their operational capabilities. We're bleeding them, she explained to her officers during a brief tactical pause. Death by 1,000 cuts. Humans learned long ago that you don't have to outmuscle a stronger opponent. You just have to outlast them. By the 3rd day, the Voidborn harvesting operation had fallen into disarray. Nearly half their harvester craft were disabled or destroyed, and 3 capital ships had withdrawn to the outer system for emergency repairs. More significantly, the remaining vessels had been forced to abandon their efficient harvesting formation in favor of a defensive posture, dramatically slowing their resource collection. It was during this lull that an unexpected transmission reached the Thunderchild, not from the Voidborn but from an assembly monitoring vessel that had finally arrived to observe the situation. Unauthorized human warship, this is High Observer Vex of the Galactic Assembly, came the imperious voice over the communication channel. You are in violation of multiple assembly protocols regarding military intervention in non-member conflicts. Power down your weapons and prepare to be escorted from Tellurian space immediately. Reese exchanged an incredulous look with Ambassador Ziri before activating the response channel. High Observer, this is Captain Maya Reese of the UES Thunderchild. We are currently engaged in defensive operations against a hostile force that presents a clear and present danger to both Telluria and Earth. We respectfully decline your instruction to withdraw. Captain Reese, Vex's voice had taken on a note of strained patience. You fail to understand the delicate balance of galactic relations. The Assembly has procedures for handling situations such as these. Your primitive military intervention could have far-reaching diplomatic consequences. With all due respect, High Observer, Reese replied, her tone making it clear just how little respect she actually held for the Assembly official. While your organization was debating procedures, an entire civilization was being systematically destroyed. Where I come from, we call that genocide, and we don't stand by and watch it happen. Before Vex could respond, the tactical alert sounded. Captain, Alvarez called urgently. The remaining Voidborn capital ships are forming a new configuration. Energy readings suggest they're combining their weapons capabilities for a coordinated strike. Target, Reese demanded. Not us, Alvarez replied, surprise evident in her voice. They're targeting the Assembly observation vessel. Understanding dawned immediately. The Voidborn didn't differentiate between the various non-Voidborn species. All were simply resources to be harvested. The arrival of the Assembly vessel represented not a diplomatic complication, but merely another target. High Observer, Reese transmitted quickly. The Voidborn are preparing to fire on your position. Your shields will not withstand their combined weapon systems. I strongly suggest you initiate emergency FTL protocols immediately. Impossible, Vex replied, though alarm had crept into their voice. Assembly protocols require the transmission, cut off as the Voidborn weapons discharged, a concentrated beam of coherent energy that lanced toward the Assembly vessel with devastating precision. What happened next would later be described in numerous conflicting reports throughout the galaxy. The Thunderchild, despite being significantly outgunned and having no obligation to protect an Assembly that had refused to help Telluria, dropped its stealth protocols and placed itself directly in the path of the Voidborn attack. The human warships' advanced kinetic barriers absorbed the initial impact, but the strain was immediately visible as power fluctuations rippled across its hull. Rather than retreat, Captain Reese ordered a direct offensive maneuver, driving the Thunderchild straight toward the heart of the Voidborn formation. All power to forward shields and main gun, she commanded, her voice steady despite the violent shuddering of the bridge around her. Prepare to fire the Nova Cannon. The Nova Cannon, Neutron Oscillation Variance Accelerator, was the Thunderchild's most closely guarded secret, a weapon theoretically prohibited by Assembly protocols. Its existence was precisely why Earth's warship designs were classified as exploratory vessels in official documentation. Nova Cannon charged, Captain, reported Alvarez. Target locked on Voidborn command ship. Fire. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from the Thunderchild's prow, cutting through space like a surgeon's blade. When it struck the Voidborn command vessel, the effect was not the expected explosion but something far more insidious. A cascade of quantum disruptions that rippled through the ship's core systems, unraveling the very atomic bonds that held its structure together. The Voidborn command ship didn't explode. It simply disintegrated. The effect on the remaining fleet was immediate. Without their central command structure, the highly automated Voidborn vessels fell into disarray. Some attempted to continue fighting. Others began emergency retreat. Procedures and several simply drifted, their systems apparently unable to function independently. They're networked more deeply than we realized, observed Dr. Imani from the science station. The command ship must have contained their central processing core. Then let's not give them time to establish a backup, Reese ordered. Target the next largest capital ship and prepare a second Nova strike. But it proved unnecessary. Within hours, the remaining Voidborn vessels had initiated emergency FTL jumps, abandoning their harvesting operation entirely. Whether retreating to regroup or simply fleeing from an unexpectedly dangerous adversary was unclear, but Telluria, for the moment, was saved. The aftermath brought unexpected developments. The Assembly observation vessel, having witnessed both the Voidborn attack and the Thunderchild's intervention, transmitted detailed records of the encounter throughout Assembly space. For the first time, many civilizations saw concrete evidence of the threat the Voidborn represented, and the unexpected capabilities of the primitive Deathworlders they had so easily dismissed. 3 days later, as the Thunderchild's crew assisted with Tellurian recovery efforts, Captain Reese was summoned to an emergency assembly consultation. She arrived to find not only High Observer Vex and the full Assembly Council, but representatives from a dozen non-member species as well. "Captain Reese," began Vex, their tone notably less condescending than in previous interactions, "the Assembly has reviewed the events at Telluria with great interest. Your actions, while technically in violation of our protocols, have revealed concerning gaps in our collective security arrangements." Reese maintained a neutral expression. "The UES Thunderchild was simply fulfilling its mission to protect Earth interests, High Observer. The Voidborn harvesting pattern indicated Earth would likely be targeted following Telluria's consumption." "Yes, quite understandable from your perspective," Vex conceded. "However, the efficacy of your unconventional tactics has prompted significant discussion among Assembly members. There is growing consensus that our existing defensive doctrines may be inadequate against threats such as the Voidborn." "What are you suggesting, High Observer?" Vex appeared uncomfortable. "The Assembly would like to propose a formal defensive cooperation agreement with Earth. Your species' unique evolutionary experience on a—" They hesitated. "Deathworld has clearly produced military innovations that could complement our own technological advantages." Reese allowed herself a small smile. "I believe Earth would be amenable to such discussions, provided they're conducted as equals rather than as primitive newcomers requiring guidance." "Of course," Vex agreed hastily. "And as a gesture of good faith, the Assembly has unanimously voted to extend full membership status to Telluria, with expedited restoration assistance for their world." Ambassador Ziri, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "While Telluria accepts this belated offer with gratitude, we too wish to formalize our relationship with Earth." Captain Reese and her crew did what centuries of Assembly cooperation could not. They took action when action was needed. As the diplomatic discussions continued around her, Reese found her attention drawn to the observation window overlooking Telluria. The black patches that had threatened to consume the planet were already receding as emergency remediation measures took effect. It would take years for the world to fully recover, but it would recover, something that would have been impossible without intervention. Sometimes, she reflected, the galaxy didn't need more protocols, more discussions, more careful deliberation. Sometimes what it needed was a ship full of Deathworlders willing to fight when fighting was necessary. And if the Assembly couldn't understand that, well, they would learn, just as the Voidborn had learned. Humans might be newcomers to the galactic stage, but they carried with them the hard-won wisdom of a species that had survived against all odds. "Captain," called one of her officers from the doorway, interrupting her thoughts. "Message from Earth Command. They're dispatching the Dreadnought-class vessels Valiant and Defiant to reinforce our position." Reese nodded, allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Earth had understood the message she'd sent with the Thunderchild's lone stand. The galaxy was more dangerous than they had been led to believe, and humanity would need to be ready. "Acknowledge receipt," she instructed, "and inform command that we may have just changed the rules of engagement out here. For better or worse, the galaxy now knows what it means when Deathworlders answer a call for help."